Well, there was a time when Rabbi Hugo Gryn phoned me and said, Richard, I've been approached by some Muslim people to talk about something to do with Muslims and Jews. Could you come along to the meeting? And I said, yes, of course. And this is a man called Risal-Din and his convert wife, Sabah Risal-Din. And Greville Janner was there, and the three of us. And it was quite an amusing incident. We just had coffee together in a hotel in London. And these two Muslims said, we've set up a charity called under Zakat. We said, oh, we know about Zakat, Sadaqah, same sort of thing. And yes, we know all about that. And we wanted to develop more relations between Muslims, Jews and Christians, and we found plenty of Christian people. We don't quite know the organization in Judaism, in the Jewish community. So Greville Janner being Greville Janner said, oh, that's us. The Sabah, being a rather sharp lady, said, what's the name of your foundation? And we were aghast, of course, because we weren't in a foundation at all. So I nudged Hugo and I said, what are we going to call it? And he said, Maimonides. So we said, oh, we're the Maimonides Foundation. And that's how Maimonides Foundation started. And we started having dinners together. It's about 30 years, 25, 30 years ago, I suppose now. We had a series of dinners when we got more and more involved with getting younger people in. But they were all confidential dinners, about 4 a year, funded alternately of one side or the other. And really got going in some sorts of ways. And then we decided to set it up as a charity. And we brought in some, realizing that we were three Ashkenazi Jews, we should bring in some Sephardis. We brought in Sephardi Jews, and it got going quite nicely, but it was still quite confidential. We set up a business people's group and various other groupings, a women's group and so on as well. That was all very interesting, but very small scale, but it was very tentative as well, and we were learning how to begin to relate to each other, which of course people like Jonathan Magonet have been doing for 20 years before us. He'd been really deep into it all, which of course I only later found out. Anyway, unfortunately, Maimonides, for various reasons, broke up, and Greville Janner and I had to leave, which allowed us, in a way, to set up our own organisation. So he set up his organisations that he's done very well with, and I set up a group of. I decided, because I'd been on the Islamophobia Commission of the Runnymede Trust by that time, where I'd met many, many Muslims around the country. I'd been one of the non-Muslim commissioners on this Commission on British Muslims and Islamophobia. And a lot of them would say, "Oh, Richard, this Jewish Council for Racial Equality that you chair, could we meet again?" And I thought, why do you want to meet the Jewish Council for Racial Equality? You know, it's a very small organisation, one person and a few friends who were on the executive committee. And I chaired it at that time. And I asked some of my Muslim friends, and they said, you don't understand. 80% of the Muslims in this country are from the Indian subcontinent. They've never met any Jews, but they know the history of the Jews, both the fantasies about horns and tails and controlling the world and the media and George Bush and all that sort of stuff. On the other hand, they also knew about the golden ages in Spain and also, of course, in Salonika and places like that. They knew that history very well. They wanted to marry these sort of negative and these positive stereotypes. I think that's what they wanted. So I then decided I'd had some difficulty in setting up any real dialogue between ordinary Muslims and ordinary Jews, but finding the Jews to meet all those Muslims. So I set up my own organisation called Aleph Aleph UK, which is, of course, the first letters of the Hebrew and the Arabic alphabets, plus UK, because we're a UK people. And I think that there's this new opportunity. There's Muslims and Jews have lived together in the past, but now we have a new situation where we've got significant communities from both people living side by side in Europe, particularly in the UK, my experience, personal experience. But we're both minorities. We're not the Jews aren't the second-class citizens like the Dhimmi under Muslim rule. And because we're both minorities together, this is a real opportunity. One young Muslim said to me once, you know, we don't have a theology of being a minority, whereas you Jews don't have a theology of being in the majority, which I think is part of the problem perhaps that Israel faces in some ways. So I think we have a lot to learn from each other. Muslims say, can we set up a board of deputies like your board of deputies? And I say, you want a board of deputies like our board of deputies, jokingly. But I understand what they're trying to do. And so they think they can learn a lot from us, but I think we can learn a lot from them as well. Well, first of all, I'm very much a believer because of my own experience. I happen to, because it was Muslims who were saying, can we meet with Jews? I've done Muslims and Jews. So I'm not much involved in three faith dialogue, or 9 faith dialogue for that matter either. But I also actually believe that when we have a dialogue rather than a trialogue, you get much closer to the nitty-gritty of things very quickly, particularly with Muslims and Jews, where, if you like, because we're both minorities, if you have Christians present, they're very much in the majority and they're the dominant grouping. So it's a danger that dialogue, or trialogue particularly, doesn't get beyond the plight. Isn't it wonderful that we're all here together? Let's meet again sometime. Let's have more tea and big biscuits, you know. So in that sort of grinning, smiling sort of way. And Jonathan Maganet points out in his book on these sorts of things that it's only when you get to know each other and get to spend time together that you begin to get beyond that grinning, delightful, rather superficial sort of dialogue. And I think that the Muslim-Jewish dialogue, I find, particularly when you get people who've never met each other before and have no particular reason because they're not involved in these things, I think that the dialogue gets going very intensely and very quickly into all sorts of things other than just Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And I find it one of the most exciting and dynamic things I've done in my life. And I've done a lot of things, from being a doctor and dealing with racism and so on, and being on government inquiries into racism. But this, to my mind, is something really, really urgent. With the Middle East problems, it's even more urgent than ever before. And also, with the rise of fascism in Europe again, where Britain is now becoming the leading group in some ways in Europe, in the fascist world. I think it's even more important than ever before that Muslims and Jews regain that sort of confidence in knowing each other. So having spent a year out now in dealing with racism, because it was the 10th anniversary of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, which I was on the panel of, I produced a report on that 10 years on. That took me away from my Muslim-Jewish dialogue. So now I'm absolutely determined to get back into Muslim-Jews and to revive the Aleph UK, which went into a series of doldrums for one reason and another. And I'm looking forward with great enthusiasm to finding the Jews to meet with the many Muslims who are now yearning to meet with us Jews. I think it's absolutely vital that if you're trying to get into an area of, if you like, sociological activism, which is what I suppose you might describe what I'm doing here and what we're doing here, not to have an academic department behind you is a great, great gap. And I'll give you examples of why this is so. About 15 years ago, we had a series of seminars which were named after my mother, called the late Mother Beryl Stone Symposia. 2 books came out of that. They were published by a non-academic press. And basically they disappeared without much trace. They went into a few libraries and that's about it really. Because they didn't have an academic department which could lead seminars on them and all the other stuff. They just became orphans. More recently in 2005 we did a series of mapping positive contacts between British Muslims and British Jews in Britain, which is I think, a very important document. And in fact it's been used by the European Platform for Muslim-Jewish Relations to do a similar mapping project in European countries. And they're just going to do starting a second mapping there as well. But again, there was no academic background. I had to borrow a couple of academics from the Muslim and the Jewish world, a couple of PhD students from both, to be monitoring what we were doing and supporting what we were doing to make it at least some sort of academic analysis for it. So again, I think if the next time we do that, another mapping project, which I hope we probably will do, we will do it, I think, as a joint thing between Aleph UK and with you here in Cambridge, because there's now an academic centre for the study of Muslim-Jewish relations. Absolutely vital, I think, for any people, activists like me, to have people like you there as partners. Well, when I said earlier that 80% of the Muslims in this country come from the Indian subcontinent, they actually are not aware of very much, or they're quite aware of the histories in the Middle East, but they actually have no real connection with that. Where in the Middle East, the Arabs and the Jews know each other almost too well, you might say. Whereas in Europe, in the Northwest Europe, apart from the French with Algeria, the Muslims and Jews actually don't know each other. We don't know each other's backgrounds. I, as an Ashkenazi Jew, I'm learning a huge amount from this conference that the CMJR has got going at the moment on the Arabs in the Arabic Jews and what's happened to them, and that huge culture going back 2,500 years in many cases, which has just been lost in the last 50 years or so, and what's being done now to try and keep hold of some of that history. So I'm aware of that, but that's informing me. But certainly as an Ashkenazi Jew, who's got very little contact with Muslims in the past, except to an extent through my work as a doctor when I had patients who were Muslims, Bangladeshis in particular. But meeting now Muslims who have the same disconnection from the long past history, but it's something that's in your psyche there. I think in a way I find it easier to relate to Muslims from the subcontinent than I do from Arabic Muslims. So I'm having to learn to do that, and I think they're also having to learn to do the same with us as well. But I started out thinking that Israel and Palestine, we must not allow it to influence our relations here. There's no political reason whatever why Muslims and Jews in Northwest Europe, and particularly in the UK, shouldn't be building a new golden age together. Why not? But on the other hand, I've realised that particularly with that was in the time when there was the peace process going on. The Oslo Accord was being discussed. So actually the Israel and Palestine didn't impact it negatively very much on Muslim-Jewish relations. With the Second Intifada and now with Gaza and all these sorts of things going on, that sort of heightened temperature and tension in the Middle East, you cannot avoid it anymore. So we have to find ways of addressing it. And I've decided in my own mind, I can't talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict. I'm not an expert. Other people like Tony Klug in the Jewish community are an expert, and that's good for him, and he does it, and that's wonderful. And he runs an Arab-Jewish organization, which is terribly important. Because most of my relationships are with Indian subcontinent people and from elsewhere, and increasingly from Arab lands as well, what I can talk about, I think with some authority now, is the impact of the Middle East problem on Muslim-Jewish relations. So if you like, I can talk about Israel-Palestine, but in a sort of at a second step away, one step away. But inevitably we do get drawn into it, actually talking about the conflict. And there are not many of us in the Jewish community who have actually got that capacity for talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict. So I think it's important that we actually do it. But I must find my Muslim friends, and we do it as a dialogue always. So it's not just me, it's always a Muslim and a Jew talking together, talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Let me just push you a bit further. When you talk about the impact, not so much the conflict, but the impact of the conflict on Muslim-Jewish relations in Northwest Europe, what impact does it have?
Of course, it's the first thing to remember is that it's the tool that is used by the enemies of Islam and Judaism, and Muslims and Jews. It's the tool they use to divide us. Because, as I say, there's no reason why we shouldn't be close together in this country. If we attack each other, as unfortunately is happening all too often these days, then our common enemies, for example, of British fascists and the European fascists, can sit at home and laugh because we're doing their dirty work for them. So that's one thing that's worth saying, and that reminds people of the urgency of us working together. When it comes to Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, some of the worst Islamophobia, fear of Muslims, is in the Jewish community. Some of the worst anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish sentiment is actually in Muslim communities. So we need to recognise our own, if you like, faults within our own communities and how we overcome those. Having spent now 6 years or more of the last 10 years on the Islamophobia Commission, always as a Jew, I think actually puts me in a strong position for talking exactly about those subjects. But the interesting thing and the fun thing is that when Jews and Muslims, I find, do start getting together, particularly just ordinary bottom-up type of groups of community people, just individuals, we actually very quickly get off those negative things onto the positive. What can we actually do together? And you find there's so many projects bubbling up all over the place, positive stuff. The Muju crew from Kilburn Tricycle Theatre, who are doing arts of various kinds. There's people doing music in the two faiths. There's the internet radio station based in Bristol, Salam Shalom. People are doing all sorts of wonderful, positive stuff going along. I think we need to be recognising that that's really not difficult to do. And I think the government should be funding it from all their community cohesion budgets, but unfortunately the government doesn't see Muslims and Jews as something very important. I think it's terribly, terribly important because above all it does, it prevents extremism in both of our communities. So it actually takes people away from their hardline attitudes towards each other.
Dr Richard Stone, thank you very much.
Thank you.